first story I'm going to go through is called The Strange Tale of Dr. Dog. I thought this sounded very interesting, so. Far up in the mountains of the province of Hunan, in the central part of China, there once lived in a small village a rich gentleman who only had one child. This girl, like the daughter of Guan Yu in the story of the Great Bell, was the very joy of her father's life. Now Mr. Min, for that was the gentleman's name, was famous throughout the whole district for his learning, and, as he was also the owner of much property, he spared no effort to teach Honeysuckle the wisdom of the sages, and to give her everything she craved. Of course, this was enough to spoil most children, but Honeysuckle was not at all like other children. As sweet as the flower from which she took her name, she listened to her father's slightest command and obeyed without ever waiting to be told a second time. Her father often bought kites for her of every shape and kind. They were fish, birds, butterflies, lizards, and huge dragons, one of which had a tail more than 30 feet long. Mr. Min was very skillful in flying these kites for little Honeysuckle, and so naturally did his birds and butterflies circle round and hover about in the air that almost any little Western boy would have been deceived and said, "Why, there is a real bird and not a kite at all." Then again he would fasten a queer little instrument to the string, which made a kind of humming noise, and as he waved his hand from side to side, "It is the wind singing, Daddy," cried Honeysuckle, clapping her hands with joy, singing a kite song to both of us. Sometimes, to teach his little darling a lesson, if she had been the least naughty, Mr. Min would fasten queerly twisted scraps of paper, on which were written many Chinese words, to the string of her favourite kite. "What are you doing, Daddy?" Honeysuckle would ask. "What can those queer-looking papers be?" "On every piece is written a sin that we have done." "What is a sin, Daddy?" "Oh, when Honeysuckle has been naughty, that is a sin," he answered gently. "Your old nurse is afraid to scold you, and if you are to grow up to be a good woman, Daddy must teach you what is right." Then Mr. Min would send the kite up high, high over the housetops, even higher than the tall pagoda on the hillside. When all its cord was let out, he would pick up 2 sharp stones, and handing them to Honeysuckle, would say, "Now, daughter, cut the string, and the wind will carry away the sins that are written down on the scraps of paper." "But, Daddy, the kite is so pretty. Mayn't we keep our sins a little longer?" she would innocently ask. "No, child, it is dangerous to hold on to one's sins. Virtue is the foundation of happiness," he would reply sternly, choking back his laughter at her question. "Make haste and cut the cord." So Honeysuckle, always obedient, at least with her father, would saw the string in between 2 sharp stones, and with a childish cry of despair would watch her favourite kite, blown by the wind, sail farther and farther away, until at last, straining her eyes, she could see it sink slowly to the earth in some far distant meadow. "Now laugh and be happy," Mr. Min would say, "for your sins are all gone. See that you do not get a new supply of them." Honeysuckle was also fond of seeing the Punch and Judy show, for, you must know, this old-fashioned amusement for children was enjoyed by little folks in China, perhaps 3,000 years before your great-grandfather was born. It is even said that the great Emperor Mu, when he saw his favourite wife. He ordered the showman to be put to death, and it was with great difficulty the poor fellow persuaded his Majesty that the dancing puppets were not really alive at all, but only images of cloth and clay. No wonder then Honeysuckle liked to see Punch and Judy, if the Son of Heaven himself had been deceived by their queer antics into thinking them real people of flesh and blood. But we must hurry on with our story, or some of our readers will be asking, but where is Dr. Dog? Are you never coming to the hero of this tale? One day, when Honeysuckle was sitting inside a shady pavilion that looked over a tiny fish pond, she was suddenly seized with a violent attack of colic. Frantic with pain, she told a servant to summon her father, and then without further ado, she fell over in a faint upon the ground. When Mr. Min reached his daughter's side, she was still unconscious. After sending for the family physician to come post haste, he got his daughter to bed, but although she recovered from her fainting fit, the extreme pain continued until the poor girl was almost dead from exhaustion. Now, when the learned doctor arrived and peered at her from under his gigantic spectacles, he could not discover the cause of her trouble. However, like some of our Western medical men, he did not confess his ignorance, but proceeded to prescribe a huge dose of boiling water, to be followed a little later by a compound of pulverized deer's horn and dried toadskin. Poor Honeysuckle lay in agony for 3 days, all the time growing weaker and weaker from loss of sleep. Every great doctor in the district had been summoned for consultation. 2 had come from Changsha, the chief city of the province, but all to no avail. It was one of those cases that seemed to be beyond the power of even the most learned physicians. In hope of receiving the great reward offered by the desperate father, these wise men searched from cover to cover in the great Chinese Cyclopedia of Medicine, trying in vain to find a method of treating the unhappy maiden. There was even thought of calling a certain foreign physician from England, who was in a distant city, and was supposed, on account of some marvellous cures he had brought to pass, to be in direct league with the devil. However, the city magistrate would not allow Mr. Min to call in this outsider, for fear trouble might be stirred up among the people. Mr. Min sent out a proclamation in every direction, describing his daughter's illness and offering to bestow on her handsome dowry and give her in marriage to whoever should be the means of bringing her back to health and happiness. He then sat at her bedside and waited, feeling that he'd done all that was in his power. There were many answers to his invitation. Physicians, old and young, came from every part of the empire to try their skill, and when they had seen poor Honeysuckle and also the huge pile of silver shoes her father offered as a wedding gift, they all fought with might and main for her life, some having been attracted by her great beauty and excellent reputation, others by the tremendous reward. But alas for poor Honeysuckle, not one of those wise men could cure her. One day, when she was feeling a slight change for the better, she called her father and, clasping his hand with his tiny one, said, "Were it not for your love, I would give up this hard fight and pass over into the dark wood, or, as my old grandmother says, fly up into the western heavens. For your sake, because I am your only child, and especially because you have no son, I have struggled hard to live, but now I feel that the next attack of this dreadful pain will carry me away, and oh, I do not want to die." Here Honeysuckle wept as if her heart would break, and her old father wept too, for the more she suffered, the more he loved her. Just then her face began to turn pale. "It is coming. The pain is coming, father. Very soon I shall be no more. Goodbye, father. Goodbye. Good. Here her voice broke, and a great sob almost broke her father's heart. He turned away from her bedside. He could not bear to see her suffer. He walked outside and sat down on a rustic bench. His head fell upon his bosom, and the great salt tears trickled down his long grey beard. As Mr. Min sat thus overcome with grief, he was startled at hearing a low whine. Looking up, he saw, to his astonishment, a shaggy mountain dog about the size of a Newfoundland. The huge beast looked into the old man's eyes with so intelligent and human an expression, with such a sad and wistful gaze, that the grey beard addressed him, saying, "Why have you come? To cure my daughter?" The dog replied with 3 short barks, wagging his tail vigorously and turning toward the half-open door that led into the room where the girl lay. By this time, willing to try any chance whatever of reviving his daughter, Mr. Min bade the animal follow him into Honeysuckle's apartment. Placing his forepaws upon the bedside, the dog looked long and steadily at the wasted form before him, and held his ear intently for a moment over the maiden's heart. Then, with a slight cough, he deposited from his mouth into her outstretched hand a tiny stone. Touching her wrist with his right paw, he motioned to her to swallow the stone. "Yes, my dear, obey him," counselled her father, as she turned to him inquiringly, "for good Dr. Dog has been sent to your bedside by the mountain fairies, who have heard of your illness, and who wish to invite you back to life again." Without further delay, the sick girl, who was by this time almost burned away by the fever, raised her hand to her lips and swallowed the tiny charm. Wonder of wonders! No sooner had it passed her lips than a miracle occurred. The red flush passed away from her face, the pulse resumed its normal beat, the pains departed from her body, and she arose from the bed well and smiling. Flinging her arms around her father's neck, she cried out in joy, "Oh, I am well again, well and happy, thanks to the good medicine of the physician." The noble dog barked 3 times, wild with delight at hearing these tearful words of gratitude, bowed low, and put his nose in Honeysuckle's outstretched hand. Mr. Min, greatly moved by his daughter's magical recovery, turned to the strange physician, saying, "Noble sir, were it not for the form you have taken for some unknown reason, I would willingly give 4 times the sum in silver that I promised for the cure of the girl into your possession. As it is, I suppose you have no use for silver any more, but remember that so long as we live, whatever we have is yours for the asking, and I beg of you to prolong your visit, to make this the home of your old age. In short, remain here forever as my guest, nay, as a member of my family." The dog barked thrice, as if in assent. From that day he was treated as an equal by father and daughter. The many servants were commanded to obey his slightest whim, to serve him with the most expensive food on the market, to honeysuckle was alighting from her chair. Without a moment's warning, the huge animal dashed past the attendants, seized his beautiful mistress in his mouth, and before anyone could stop him, bore her off to the mountains. By the time the alarm was sounded, darkness had fallen over the valley, and as the night was cloudy, no trace could be found of the dog and his fair burden. Once more, the frantic father left no stone unturned to save his daughter. Huge rewards were offered. Bands of woodmen scoured the mountains high and low, but alas, no sign of the girl could be found. The unfortunate father gave up the search and began to prepare himself for the grave. There was nothing now left in life that he cared for, nothing but thoughts of his departed daughter. Honeysuckle was gone forever. Alas, said he, quoting the lines of a famous poet who had fallen into despair, my whiting hair would make an endless rope, yet would not measure all my depth of woe. Several long years passed by, years of sorrow for the aging man, pining for his departed daughter. One beautiful October day, he was sitting in the very same pavilion where he had so often sat with his darling. His head was bowed forward on his breast. His forehead was lined with grief. A rustling of leaves attracted his attention. He looked up. Standing directly in front of him was Dr. Dog, and lo, riding on his back, clinging to the animal's shaggy hair, was Honeysuckle, his long-lost daughter, while standing nearby were three of the most handsomest boys he had ever set eyes on. Ah, my daughter, my darling daughter, where have you been all these years? Cried the delighted father, pressing the girl to his aching breast. Have you suffered many a cruel pain since you were snatched away so suddenly? Has your life been filled with sorrow? Only at the thought of your grief, she replied tenderly, stroking his forehead with her slender fingers. Only at the thought of your suffering, only at the thought of how I should like to see you every day and tell you that my husband was kind and good to me. For you must know, dear father, this is no mere animal that stands beside you. This is Dr. Dog, who cured me and claimed me as his bride because of your promise, and he is a great magician. He can change himself at will into 1,000 shapes. He chooses to come here in the form of a mountain beast, so that no one may penetrate the secret of his distant palace. Then he is your husband, faltered the old man, gazing at the animal with a new expression on his wrinkled face. Yes, my kind and noble husband, the father of my 3 sons, your grandchildren, whom we have brought to pay you a visit. And where do you live? In a wonderful cave in the heart of the great mountains. A beautiful cave whose walls and floors are covered with crystals and encrusted with sparkling gems. The chairs and tables are set with jewels. The rooms are lighted by 1,000 glittering diamonds. Oh, oh, it is lovelier than the palace of the Son of Heaven himself. We feed on the flesh of wild deer and mountain goats, and fish from the clearest mountain stream. We drink cold water out of golden goblets without first boiling it, for it is purity itself. We breathe fragrant air that blows through forests of pine and hemlock. We only live to love each other and our children, and oh, we are so happy. And you, Father, you must come back with us to the great mountains and live there with us for the rest of your days, which, the gods grant, may be very many. The old man pressed his daughter once more to his breast and fondled the children, because we felt sure that every reader would like to learn the secret of the dog that cured a sick girl and won her for his bride. That is a lovely story. The next story is called The Two Jugglers. One beautiful spring day, two men strolled into the public square of a well-known Chinese city. They were plainly dressed and looked like ordinary countrymen who had come in to see the sights. Judging by their faces, they were father and son. The elder, a wrinkled man of perhaps 50, wore a scant grey beard. The younger had a small box on his shoulder. At the hour when these strangers entered the public square, a large crowd had gathered, for it was feast day, and everyone was bent on having a good time. All the people seemed very happy. Some, seated in little open-air booths, were eating, drinking, and smoking. Others were buying odds and ends from the street vendors, tossing coins and playing various games of chance. The two men walked about aimlessly. They seemed to have no friends amongst the pleasure seekers. At last, however, as they stood reading a public notice posted at the entrance of the town hall, a bystander asked them who they were. "Oh, we are jugglers from a distant province," said the elder, smiling and pointing towards the box. "We can do many tricks for the amusement of people." Soon it was spread that among the crowd, two famous jugglers had just arrived from the capital, and that they were able to perform many wonderful deeds. Now it happened that the mandarin, or the mayor of the city, at that very moment was entertaining a number of guests in the yamen. They had just finished eating, and the host was wondering what he should do to amuse his friends, when a servant told him of the jugglers. "Ask them what they can do," said the mandarin eagerly. "I will pay them well if they can really amuse us, but I want something more than the old tricks of knife throwing and balancing. They must show us something new." The servant went outside and spoke to the jugglers. "The great man bids you to tell him what you can do. If you can amuse his visitors, he will bring them out to the private grandstand and let you perform before them and the people who are gathered together. Tell your honourable master," said the elder, whom we shall call Chang, "that try us as he will not be disappointed. Tell him that we come from the unknown land of dreams and visions, that we can turn rocks into mountains, rivers into oceans, mice into elephants. In short, that there is nothing in magic too difficult for us to do." The official was delighted when he heard the report of his servant. "Now we may have a little fun," he said to his guests, "for there are jugglers outside who will perform their wonderful tricks before us." The guests filed out onto the grandstand at one side of the public square. The mandarin commanded that a rope should be stretched across as to leave an open space in full view of the crowd, where the two Changs might give their exhibition. For a time, the two strangers entertained the people with some of the simpler tricks, such as spinning plates in the air, tossing bowls up and catching them on chopsticks, making flowers grow from empty pots, and transforming one object into another. At last, however, the mandarin cried out, "These tricks are very good of their kind, but how about those idle boasts of changing rivers into oceans and mice into elephants? Did you not say that you came from the land of dreams? These tricks you have done are stale and shop-worn. Have you nothing new with which to regale my guests on this holiday?" "Most certainly, your excellency, but surely you would not have a labourer do more than his employer requires. Would that not be quite contrary to the teaching anything that you demand, I can do for you. Only say the word. The mandarin laughed outright at this boasting language. Take care, my man. Do not go too far with your promises. There are too many impostors around me to believe every stranger. Hark you, no lying, for if you lie in the presence of my guests, I shall take great pleasure in having you beaten. My words are quite true, your excellency, repeated Chang earnestly. What have we to gain by deceit? We who have performed our miracles before the countless hosts of yonder western heaven. Ha ha, hear the braggarts, shouted the guests. What shall we command them to do? For a moment they consulted together, whispering and laughing. I have it, cried the host finally. Our feast was short of fruit, since this is the off-season. Suppose we let this fellow supply us. Here, fellow, produce us a peach, and be quick about it. We have no time for fooling. What, masters, a peach? Exclaimed the elder Chang in mock dismay. Surely at this season you do not expect a peach. Caught at his own game, laughed the guests, and the people began to hoot derisively. But father, you promised to do anything he required, urged the son. If he asks even a peach, how can you refuse and at the same time save your face? Hear the boy talk, mumbled the father, and yet perhaps he's right. Very well, masters, turning to the crowd. If it's a peach you want, why, a peach you shall have, even though I must send into the garden of the western heaven for the fruit. The people became silent, and the mandarin's guests forgot to laugh. The old man, still muttering, opened the box from which he had been taking the magic bowls, plates, and other articles. To think of people wanting peaches at this season, what is the world coming to? After fumbling about in the box for some moments, he drew out a skein of golden thread, fine spun and as light as a gossamer. No sooner as he unwound the portion of the thread than a sudden gust of wind carried it up into the air above the heads of the onlookers. Faster and faster the old man paid out the magic coil. Higher and higher the free end rose into the heavens until, strain his eyes as he would, no one present could see into what far region it had vanished. Wonderful, wonderful, shouted the people with one voice. The old man is a fairy. For a moment they forgot all about the mandarin, the jugglers, and the peach. So amazed were they at beholding the flight of the magic thread. At last the old man seemed satisfied with the distance to which his cord had sailed, and with a bow to the spectators, he tied the end to a large wooden pillar, which helped to support the roof of the grandstand. For a moment, the structure trembled and swayed as if it were to be carried off into the blue ether. The guests turned pale and clutched their chairs for support, but not even the mandarin dared to speak, so sure were they now that they were in the presence of fairies. Everything is ready for the journey, said old Chang calmly. What? Shall you leave us? Asked the mayor, finding his voice again. Aye. Oh no, my old bones are not spry enough for quick climbing. My son here will bring us the magic peach. He is handsome and active enough to enter the heavenly garden. Graceful, oh graceful is that peach tree, of course. You remember the line from the poem. And a graceful man must pluck the fruit. The mandarin was still more surprised at the juggler's knowledge of a famous poem from the classics. It made him and his friends all the more certain that the newcomers were indeed fairies. The young man, at a sign from his father, tightened his belt and the bands around his ankles, and then, with a graceful gesture to the astonished people, himself for a moment on the steep incline, and then ran as nimbly up as a sailor would have mounted a rope ladder. Higher and higher he climbed, till he seemed no bigger than a lark ascending into the blue sky, and then, like some tiny speck, far, far away on the western horizon. The people gazed in open-mouthed wonder. They were struck dumb and filled with some nameless fear. They hardly dared to look at the enchanter who stood calmly in their midst, smoking his long-stemmed pipe. The mandarin, ashamed of having laughed and threatened this man, who was clearly a fairy, did not know what to say. He snapped his long fingernails and looked at his guests in mute astonishment. The visitors silently drank their tea, and the crowd of sightseers craned their necks in a vain effort to catch sight of the vanished fairy. Only one in all that assembly, a bright-eyed little boy of 8, dared to break the silence, and he caused a hearty burst of merriment by crying out, "Oh, Daddy, will the bad young man fly off into the sky and leave his poor father all alone?" The greybeard laughed loudly with the others and tossed the lad a copper. "Ah, the good boy," he said, smiling. "He has been well trained to love his father. No fear of foreign ways spoiling his filial piety." After a few moments of waiting, old Chang laid aside his pipe and fixed his eyes once more on the western sky. "It is coming," he said quietly. "The peach will soon be here." Suddenly he held out his hand as if to catch some falling object, but, look as they would, the people could see nothing. Swish, thud, it came like a streak of light, and lo, there in the magician's fingers was a peach, the most beautiful specimen the people have ever seen, large and rosy. "Straight from the garden of the gods," said Chang, handing the fruit to the mandarin. "A peach in the second moon, and the snow hardly off the ground." Higher and higher he climbed. Trembling with excitement, the official took the peach and cut it open. It was large enough for all of his guests to have a taste, and such a taste it was. They smacked their lips and wished for more, secretly thinking that never again would ordinary fruit be worth eating. But all this time the old juggler, magician, fairy, or whatever you choose to call him, was looking anxiously into the sky. The result of this trick was more than he had bargained for. True, he had been able to produce the magic peach which the mandarin had called for, but his son, where was his son? He shaded his eyes and looked far up into the blue heavens, and so did the people, but no one could catch a glimpse of the departed youth. "Oh, my son, cried the old man in despair. "How cruel is the fate that has robbed me of you, the only prop of my declining years. Oh, my boy, would that I had not sent you on such a perilous journey. Who now will look after my grave when I am gone?" Suddenly the silken cord on which the young man had sped so daringly into the sky gave a quick jerk, which almost toppled over the post to which it was tied, and there, before the very eyes of the people, it fell from the lofty height, a silken pile from the ground in front of them. The greybeard perhaps it is a fairy old boy himself who is among us. The mandarin rose and addressed the jugglers, thanking them in the name of their city for their visit and for the taste they had given to him and his guests of the peach from the heavenly orchard. Even as he spoke, the magic box opened again, the two fairies disappeared inside, the lid closed, and the chest rose from the ground above the heads of the people. For a moment it floated round in a circle, like some homing pigeon trying to find its bearings before starting on a return journey. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it shot off into the heavens and vanished from the sight of those below, and not a thing remained as proof of the strange visitors except the magic peach seed that lay beside the teacups on the mandarin's table. According to the most ancient writings, there is now nothing left to tell of the story. It has been declared, however, by later scholars that the official and his friends who had eaten the magic peach at once began to feel a change in their lives. While, before the coming of the fairies, they had lived unfairly, accepting bribes and taking part in many shameful practices, now, after tasting of the heavenly fruit, they began to grow better. The people soon began to honour and love them, saying, Surely these great men are not like others of their kind, for these men are just and honest in their dealings with us. They seem not to be ruling for their own reward. However this may be, we do know that before many years their city became the centre of the greatest peach-growing section of China, and even yet when strangers walk in the orchard and look up admiringly at the beautiful sweet-smelling fruit, the natives sometimes ask proudly, "And have you never heard about the wonderful peach, which was the beginning of all of our orchards? The magic peach the fairies brought us from the western heaven." That's cute. I like that. The last one I'll do today, the third and final story of today's video, is called The Golden Nugget. Once upon a time, many years ago, there lived in China two friends named Kiwu and Pao Shu. These two young men, like Damon and Phidias, loved each other and were always together. No cross words passed between them. No unkind thoughts marred their friendship. Many an interesting tale might be told of their unselfishness and of how the good fairies gave them the true reward of virtue. One story alone, however, will be enough to show how strong was their affection and their goodness. It was a bright, beautiful day in early spring when Kiwu and Pao Shu set out for a stroll together, for they were tired of the city and its noises. "Let us go into the heart of the pine forest," said Kiwu lightly. "There we can forget the cares that worry us. There we can breathe the sweetness of the flowers and lie on the moss-covered ground." "Good," said Pao Shu. "I too am tired. The forest is the place for rest." Happy as two lovers on a holiday, they passed along the winding road. Their eyes turned in longing towards the distant treetops. Their hearts beat fast in youthful pleasure as they drew nearer and nearer to the woods. "For 30 days I have worked over my books," sighed Kiwu. "For 30 days I have not had a rest. My head is stuffed so full of wisdom that I'm afraid it will burst. Oh, for a breath of the pure air blowing through the green wood." "And I," added Pao Shu sadly, "have worked like a slave at my counter and found it just as dull as you have found your books. My master treats me badly. It seems good indeed to get beyond his reach." Now they came to the border of the grove, crossed a little stream, and plunged headlong amongst the trees and shrubs. For many an hour they were rambling on, talking and laughing merrily, when suddenly on passing round a clump of covered bushes, they saw shining in the pathway directly in front of them a lump of gold. See, said both, speaking at the same time and pointing towards the treasure. Kiwu, stooping, picked up the nugget. It was nearly as large as a lemon and was very pretty. It is yours, my dear friend, he said, at the same time handing it to Pao Shu. Yours because you saw it first. No, no, answered Pao Shu. You are wrong, my brother, for you were first to speak. Now you can never say hereafter that the good fairies have not rewarded you for all your faithful hours of study. Repaid me for my study? Why, that is impossible. Are not the wise men always saying that study brings its own reward? No, the gold is yours. I insist upon it. Think of your weeks of hard labour, of the masters that have ground you to the bone. Here is something far better. Take it, laughing. May it be the nest egg by means of which you may hatch out a great fortune. Thus they joked for some minutes, each refusing to take the treasure for himself, each insisting that it belonged to the other. At last the chunk of gold was dropped in the very spot where they had first spied it, and the two comrades went away, each happy because he loved his friend better than anything else in the world. Thus they turned their backs on any chance of quarrelling. It was not for gold that we left the city, exclaimed Kiwu warmly. No, replied his friend. One day in this forest is worth 1,000 nuggets. Let us go to the spring and sit down on the rocks, suggested Kiwu. It is the coolest spot in the whole grove. When they reached the spring, they were sorry to find the place already occupied. A countryman was stretched at full length on the ground. Wake up, fellow, cried Pao Shu. There is money for you nearby. Up yonder path a golden apple is waiting for some man to go and pick it up. Then they described to the unwelcome stranger the exact spot where the treasure was, and were delighted to see him set out in eager search. For an hour they enjoyed each other's company, talking of all the hopes and ambitions of their future, and listening to the music of the birds that hopped about on the branches overhead. At last they were startled by the angry voice of the man who had gone after the nugget. What trick is this you have played on me, masters? Why do you make a poor man like me run his legs off for nothing on a hot day? What do you mean, fellow? Asked Kiwu, astonished. Did you not find the fruit we told you about? No, he answered in a tone of half-hidden rage, but in its place a monster snake, which I cut in two with my blade. Now the gods will bring me bad luck for killing something in the woods. If you thought you could drive me from this place by such a trick, you will soon find that you are mistaken, for I was first upon this spot, and you have no right to give me orders. Stop your chatter, pumpkin, and take this copper for your trouble. We thought we were doing you a favour. If you are blind, there's no one but yourself to blame. Come, Pao Shu, let us go back and have a look at this wonderful snake that has been hiding in a chunk of gold. Laughing merrily, the two companions left the countryman and turned back in search of the nugget. If I am not mistaken, said the student, the gold lies beyond that fallen tree. Quite true. We shall soon see the dead snake. Quickly they crossed the remaining stretch of pathway, with their eyes fixed intently on the ground. Arriving at the spot where they had left the shining treasure, was their surprise to see not the lump of gold, not the dead snake described by the idler, but instead 2 beautiful golden nuggets, each larger than the one they had seen at first. Each friend picked up one of these treasures and handed it joyfully to his companion. At last the fairies have rewarded gratitude for your unselfishness, said Kiwu. Yes, answered Baoshu, by granting me a chance to give you your desserts. That's nice. Just like the Japanese fairy tales, there are plenty of Chinese as well. So I made another video later on with more Chinese books and stories, but there are multiple other countries that I'll have a little look at as well, maybe change it up a bit, maybe do some Swedish or German or something, which would be pretty cool. But I really hope you've enjoyed these little stories and they've helped you chill out. Thank you so much again for joining me with this video. If I could ask a little favour, if you're still watching at this time, many of you have provided your support and I am so grateful, but if you could, if you haven't already, subscribe. I am planning to use all my subscriptions once I get a certain point to do charity fundraising videos, and you can only do that on YouTube after you hit a certain amount of subscribers, so hitting subscribe would help me hugely. I've got a couple of animal charities in mind that I would love to do some fundraising videos for later on, so if you could help me out, that would be fantastic. And thank you as always for your ongoing support. I love reading all of your comments. They honestly give me such a warm heart. I'm so grateful.